What is the implication of it in use of AMH in IVF?
Yeah, so first of all, we will try to understand where this variation is coming from. So the variation can come naturally or biologically, or it can come from measurement. For example, you are measuring the variation of weather, yeah, temperature, yeah, outside. So you measured one day it's 20 degrees, next day 25 degrees, next day 23 degrees. So you actually, the actual temperature outside in nature may be changing, or your measurement may be faulty. Your thermometer may be giving you a wrong measurement. So this is why question is actually when anything fluctuates or varies, whether this variation is coming biologically or naturally, or it's coming from the measurement. So this is why we want to know whether actually AMH naturally in women varies, or whether actually our test, AMH test, is not perfect. It shows different result every time you measure. So we at the time also in now we think that actually biggest part of variation comes from natural variation of AMH. So, and why? Because when we take IMH sample, you measure the sample and in two allocates. You separate same sample. Yeah, let us say you took the sample today, you separate it to two and measure twice. And this is called inter-assay variation, was less than 5%. In this research, published research study, in our study, inter-assay variation was less than 5%. We think, yes, measurement probably relative variation maybe 5%, but most of this is coming due to natural variation, because there is a difference between AMH in these women between two samples in average 2.6 months apart. So naturally AMH can go up and down approximately maybe 20-25%. That makes sense. In later this week or next week we'll publish our another research study which we published which measures a variation of AFC as well. That's AFC and AMH is linked, because AMH is produced from antral follicles and AFC also varies 30%. So which means very likely actually number of follicles on ovaries vary approximately 28-30%. And the level of AMH these follicles produce vary also approximately 28-30%. That's a very important thing to understand, because when you're doing IVF treatment, for example, so you can see this natural variation. Let us say you did IVF, once you had 10 follicles. So next time, because of natural variation, you can have 13-14 follicles, and next time you can have 6 follicles. So that's very important. So let us say if you had a very low number of follicles, you had a poor outcome in IVF, by chance next time you may have more follicles, especially if your IVF protocol is optimized, you may get much better result. So, but when we say variation 30%, that's average variation, which means in some patients this variation may be huge, maybe 70%, or even higher in outliers. So that we need to take into account. So understanding that actually number of follicles you have on your ovaries can fluctuate by 30% is very important for you and for your doctors, fertility specialists, to understand how your ovaries work and analyze your IVF cycle and make a plan for future IVF cycle. Yes, variation we think is mainly coming from natural variation. Yes, there's about 5% variation coming from the test itself. So implication of this variation is, like we said in IVF, is when, like we said before, in the past we thought patients with very low, critically low AMH should not have IVF treatment, especially if it's publicly funded, because we thought the chance of successful pregnancy is so low. So, and we, at the time when we published this research back in 2010, we made a recommendation saying, look, do not use AMH as a sole test to determine who should not have IVF, because it can vary, it can give a wrong result, then as a result you may deny some women of IVF treatment, in publicly funded IVF treatment. As a result, they may not be able to have a child. So we made the recommendations of, look, take everything else into account and not only AMH. So, and now we know, of course, a lot of women with very low egg reserve, very low AMH can have successful pregnancy naturally, or by doing another fertility treatment, or by doing IVF. But at the time, in 2010, our understanding of egg reserve was much poorer. So, and yeah, so this research paper contributed towards that. And the second reason, second implication of this research in IVF is, when at the time we had a very strict cutoff levels of egg reserve, because we didn't think that egg reserve varies or AMH varies. So let us say we had AMH, if your AMH is 2.2, you had FSH of 450. If your AMH is, let us say, 3.0, you had FSH of 300. We said, yes, you can have a cutoff ranges, but it should be much wider because of variation. Same patient, if she did a test today, you would give her a FSH of 450. And if she had a test after 2 months, you would have given a FSH of 300. So this is why you can have a cutoff ranges if you do use the protocols in your clinic, stratification protocols in your clinic, but this cutoff range should be wider, not very narrow. So yeah, so these two implications were there for IVF research, IVF practice.